Hi there. In this video, you're going to learn about the percent equation. First thing I want you to do before we actually get into it is write this down. This is a formula that you need to know for the percent equation. Part is equal to percent as a decimal times whole. Okay? Your objectives for this lesson are to solve percent problems using the percent equation and to solve real-world problems involving taxes. So let's start with where does the percent equation come from? So let's look at this example. What is 50% of 4? Now, off the top of your head, you should know that it's 2. But if you didn't, you know how to solve this as a proportion already, okay? So you already know how to do 50 over 100 is equal to x over 4, right? You would know how to set this up, which is this. Part over whole equals percent over 100, right? Well, how about instead of solving it like a proportion where you do 4 times 50 to get 200, right? And then divide it by 100. Okay, how about instead of doing that, we think of it like an equation. So we keep this x over 4 the way that it is. 50 divided by 100 gets you 0.50, right? So now we have this. X over 4 equals 0.50. How do we solve for x? Well, you would multiply both sides by 4, right? That way you can cancel out these 4's, right? And then you're left with x is equal to 0.50 times 4. Oh, wait a second. This is like saying part equals percent as a decimal times whole, okay? So that's where this formula comes from. So rather than sit there and make proportions and solving them, this way is actually a lot easier, a lot faster, and this is actually the method that most people use in the real world in finance when you're buying a car or anything like that, okay? So you can actually write 2 is equal to 0.50 times 4, right? Because half of 4 gets you 2. So let's look at our examples. Or let's look at the setup again. Part equals percent as a decimal times whole. So you can use a percent equation to solve problems that involve percent. One thing that's important to note is that the percent is written as a decimal. You take your decimal point that's at the end of the last number, okay? And then just move it over 2 places to the left. So anytime you're going to make it as a decimal, anytime you write a percent as a decimal, you move it 2 places over to the left. That's because here at this step, you're dividing out. 50 divided by 100 gets you 0.50, okay? So just make note that the percent is actually written as a decimal, okay? What number is 12% of 150? Well, before we start making proportions, right, we're not making proportions. We're going to use the percent equation to solve this. We need to think. Do you need to find the percent, part, or the whole? Okay? It says, what number is 12% of 150? Well, we're trying to figure out, we know 150, okay? 150 represents 100%. That's our whole. We're trying to figure out what only 12% is out of 150, okay? So we're actually trying to figure out the part. So part is equal to percent as a decimal, so move it over 2 places to the left, so it's 0.12 times 150. Oh, I just erased the whole thing by accident. Undo, sorry. All right, times 150. All right, so once you have this, the percent equation, right, you just solve. 0.12 times 150 gets you 18. So 18 is 12% of 150. Okay, I didn't do anything fancy here. All I did was I just multiplied the percent as a decimal times the whole to get the part. So much easier than making proportions. Let's look at our next example here. 21 is what percent of 40? Do you need to find the percent, part, or the whole here? Okay, well, it says what percent, so that's pretty obvious, right? We're trying to find our percent here. So you're going to just put a variable. It doesn't matter what variable, put in for a percent. Okay. Now, 21 is what percent of 40? So 40 would be your whole, right? 40 represents 100%, in other words. And your part, we're given 21. So here's our equation. 21 is equal to n times 40. How do you get n by itself here? How do you get n by itself? You would divide both sides by 40, right? When you divide both sides by 40, these 40s cancel out. You're left with 0.525 is equal to n. So 21 is, now this is important, since we found the percent, okay, the percent is written as a decimal here. In other words, it's like saying moving the decimal point 2 places to the left here. Now we need to move it 2 places to the right, okay, because we are undoing that. So it would be 52.5% of 40, okay? So just make sure that when you put it in the equation, okay, this is as a decimal form right here. We solved for n as a decimal form. If you move it 2 places to the left as a decimal form, you need to move it back 2 places to the right if you're changing it back to percent, okay? 13 is 26% of what number? So you need to find the percent, the part, or the whole. Well, you know the percent is 26. You know 13 is only 26%, right? So you know 13 represents that 26%. So that's actually the part. So you need the whole. We don't know 13 out of what is equal to 26%, right? Okay, so now we could just solve. We have 13 is equal to 0.26w. Divide both sides by 0.26, and you get your w to equal 50. So 13 is 26% of 50. Let's look at our next example. A survey found that 25% of people aged 18 to 24 gave up their home phone and only used a cell phone. If 3,264 people only use a cell phone, how many people were surveyed? Okay? Well, right here, how many people were surveyed? Right there, that tells you need to figure out what the whole is, okay? You need to figure out how many people were surveyed in total. So you have 3,264 people. This number represents 25% of how many people, okay? So W represents our whole. 25%, move decimal place over 2 places to the left, so it's 0.25, and it's 3,264 as your as what it represents. So this is the part. Part equals percent times whole. Okay? Now let's actually start multiplying and dividing out. So we have 0.25W is equal to 3264. Divide both sides by 0.25, and you get 13,056 as your whole. Okay? So in other words, about 13,056 people were surveyed in total. Okay, so let's do a tax problem. This is how people actually do tax in the real world with on your receipts. Okay, so a camera costs $250. If 6% sales tax is added, what is the total cost? So method 1 is to find the tax first and then you add. Okay, so in other words, find 6% of $250. Get whatever the number is and then just add it to your total. Okay. So let's do that first. So 6% of 250, so that's the part. Okay, so we're looking for our part. You could replace that part with anything, right? Any variable. Part equals percent as a decimal. Move it over 2 places to the left, 2 places over to the left. So percent as a decimal times 250 times your whole. Okay, multiply these two numbers and you get 15. So the tax is $15, right? And the total cost would be whatever $250 plus 15 is, and that's $265. Okay? So this is one way to do it. A faster way to find tax, using the same problem, would be to find the total percent first. Okay? Think of it as this. If you are paying the total cost, right, 100%, the total cost, 100% of $250, right? 100% is $250. Plus the tax, right? 6% of whatever, 6% of $250, okay? It's like you're paying for 106% of $250, right? Think about it. This represents 100%. And you're also paying an extra 6% on top of it. So you're paying for a total of 106% of $250. Now you could just find 106% of $250, okay? So part equals percent times whole. Move decimal place over 2 places to the left. So it's 1.6 times 250. Multiply. And guess what? You get your total to be 265. Okay, some concluding thoughts. Make sure your percent is written as a decimal. Think about what you're trying to find and replace it with a variable, and solve using inverse operations. Okay? I hope you learned about the percent equation. Thank you for watching.